Hi everybody, and welcome to Chapter 2 in our first video here. This chapter is on job order costing and how we calculate unit product costs. This is a very important chapter, so we're starting off with some very heavy content to get you guys going. So here we will look at an overview, and job order costing systems are used when 1, many different products are produced each period, and 2, the products are manufactured to order. Usually they're expensive products. And number 3, unique nature of each order requires tracing or allocating the costs to each job and maintaining cost records for each job. For example, in an automobile manufacturing company, each car would be a job. Okay, so some other examples that would use job order costing would include Boeing, aircraft manufacturing, Bechtel, they make large-scale construction business. Vista Paint, here they do business card designing, printing, and shipping. All right, so let's take a look at how that works in cost flows. We're going to charge direct material and direct labor to each job as the work is performed. So you can see here's our direct materials going to job 1, 2, and 3, and here's our direct labor going to job 1, 2, and 3. Manufacturing overhead includes indirect materials and indirect labor, and they are allocated to all the jobs rather than directly traced to each job. The direct costs of direct materials, we also have direct labor, which is also charged as direct materials are to each job directly. But the indirect materials and indirect labor are part of manufacturing overhead, along with other overhead items, such as depreciation on machines and those kinds of things. So here is a job cost sheet. And as you can see, we have some direct, we're going to be making a special order coupling here. And the department is the milling department. The direct materials, we've wrecked those in from raw materials inventory into work in process inventory here for the tune of $666. And we also spent some direct labor on time ticket 843 for 5 hours, worth another $90. Okay, so that's going to keep track of the costs on this job. So let's take a look at direct materials. Here's our material requisition. So here it's number 14873, and it's charging it to job 2 Bravo 47 in the milling department. And I think that's the same job that we had here on the job sheet, job cost sheet. So now we have 2 raw material items, quantity of 2 for the housing and a quantity of 4 for the connector, and the unit costs and the total cost for a total of $660 that we're bringing in from raw materials inventory to work in process inventory and charging directly to this job. All right, so here is that job that we just brought that in. And now we'll take a look at the labor cost. Here's the time ticket for Mary Holden. Okay, so she starts work at 7 o'clock. She works till 12, then she has lunch, and then she comes back at 12:30. She finishes at 2:30, and then she works again from 2:30 to 3:30 for a total of 8 hours. And she spends the first 7 hours on this on job 2B47, and then another 2 hours on 2B50, and the rest of her time is on maintenance. So again, that job that we talked about here was the 2B47. And here's that $90 of labor that was charged to that job. Okay, so back to the job cost sheet. Here we go with that $90 that we just charged for 5 hours. Okay, now we're going to determine a predetermined overhead rate. You may be asking, how do we get the overhead to these jobs? Well, what we do is we estimate it. And here's how we do it. We have an allocation base that we choose. Sometimes it's direct labor hours, sometimes direct labor dollars, or even machine hours. And that's how we use those to assign manufacturing overhead individual jobs. So how do we do that? It's alpha. It's impossible or highly difficult to trace overhead costs to specific jobs. Bravo, manufacturing overhead consists of many different types of things, ranging from indirect materials such as grease to the production manager's salary. And then under Charlie, many types of manufacturing overhead costs are fixed, even though output fluctuates during the period. So what we do is we do the predetermined overhead rate, abbreviated POHR, and we apply the overhead to jobs in that way. And what we do at the beginning of the year, typically, we estimate the total amount of overhead cost for the next year, usually. Doesn't have to be yearly. We can do it on a monthly basis, but typically we don't do it that way. Typically we do it for a full year. And then we estimate the total units in the allocation base for the coming period. So ideally, the allocation base is a cost driver that causes overhead. But generally speaking, we're going to be using direct labor hours or direct labor dollars. So how do we do that? The predetermined overhead rates rely on estimated data. It's an estimate. So when we do it, we're going to have to adjust every now and then for actual overhead. The actual for the overhead during the period is not known until the end of the period. So we really can't, it inhibits our ability to estimate job costs during that period. Then in number 2 here, the actual overhead costs can fluctuate seasonally, and therefore that can be misleading to decision makers. I think, as you know, electrical costs, for example, are higher in the summer than in the winter, and gas charges are higher in the winter than summer, if I remember right. In any event, the predetermined overhead rate is computed well before the period begins, using a 4-step process. Number 1, we're going to estimate the total amount of the allocation base. We call that the denominator, and that will be required for the next month's estimated level of production. Then we're going to estimate the total fixed manufacturing overhead cost for the coming period and the variable manufacturing overhead cost per unit of the allocation base. And we use an equation to estimate the total amount of the manufacturing overhead based on the formula we went through in the prior video. So Y is the total manufacturing overhead cost. Alpha here is the estimated total fixed manufacturing overhead cost. And then Bravo is the estimated variable manufacturing overhead cost per unit. And X-ray is the estimated total amount of the allocation base. And we can compute the predetermined overhead rate as the last step. So we apply overhead costs to jobs using this predetermined overhead rate. So let's do one as an example. Yoast Precision Machining estimates that it's going to require 40,000 direct labor hours to meet the coming period's estimated production level. In addition, the company estimates the total fixed manufacturing overhead at $640,000 and variable manufacturing overhead costs of $4 per direct labor hour. So if we work that through the formula here, we'll take the $640,000 plus $4, that's the per direct labor hour, times the total direct labor hours of 40,000. And that will give us total manufacturing costs of $800,000. That's the total estimated total manufacturing overhead. Then we divide that through by the number of direct labor hours, which were 40,000 in this example. So every time we have a direct labor hour, we're going to allocate or apply $20 of overhead cost to that job. So now if I look at the job cost sheet, this is just what we've done. We have 27 hours here of direct labor, and we multiply that 27 hours times the $20 per direct labor hour, and we get $540 of manufacturing overhead that we have applied to this job. So now, when we add up all our direct materials and from all our recs, here, here, and here, and all our direct labor from these time tickets here, we get a total product cost of $2,390. And we made, how many did we make? We made 2 of these little beauties. So we divide that through by 2 to get to the unit product cost of $1,195, which is shown down here at the bottom of the page. Okay, that's how we're going to record our manufacturing overhead. All right, now we're going to take a look at computing the total cost and unit product cost of a job using the plant-wide predetermined overhead rate. And here is the total cost of the job here. And now we calculate the per unit cost, which we just did. And now, for a quick check, job Whiskey Romeo 53 at November Whiskey Fab Incorporated required $200 of direct materials and 10 direct labor hours at $15 per hour. The estimated total overhead for the year was $760,000, and estimated direct labor hours were $20,000. What would be recorded as the cost of job Whiskey Romeo 53? Okay, so we would first calculate $200 of direct materials. That would be in there. And then we would have $150 of direct labor. I'm up to $350. I could probably just guess that it's $730, which it is, because we would need that much in overhead costs. But here we calculate the predetermined overhead rate at $38, direct materials, direct labor, and then our manufacturing overhead is $38 times 10 hours or $380, total $730. That looks like a good place to stop this video, and when we return, we'll take a look at the next slide.